Hello, thank you everybody for being here today. When I submitted my abstract to the conference, I wasn't sure it will be okay because I don't know how far east the Eastern Mediterranean would stretch. But luckily, Rosita and Tineke agreed to stretch it as far east as Iran, and I'm very grateful for that, and I'm very happy to be here. Since the late 19th century, sons of wealthy Iranian families were sent to Europe for their higher education, or were educated in Western-style institutes within Iran. The acquisition of modern education often entailed more than a simple familiarity with Western-originated sciences or ideologies. Men who received such education encountered and often adopted Western manners, objects, and appearance. Such Westernized appearance included jacket and trousers, a tie and a walking cane, plus an Iranian cone-shaped hat, much like what is seen in this photo. In the autobiography of Issa Sadiq, Iran's Minister of Education, he retells how the change of dress took place. Sadiq's initiation into Western practices had begun on his ride to the port from which he was about to sail to France. The Iranian students changed from their traditional garments to European dress and the Persian-style hat, and were also taught the use of cutlery. Later on in Paris, Sadiq and his colleagues asked their supervisor to provide them with European hats, since their Iranian hats attracted disrespectful attention from locals. Living in a foreign environment, Iranian students like Sadiq had to adapt their appearance and manners, bringing back to Iran, upon their return, new objects and practices. Westernized appearance then became a marker of social and educational status. Westernized men gained the nickname Farangi Ma'ab, a term that first appeared at the end of the 19th century. Different reactions to the Farangi Ma'ab illustrate the ambivalence many Iranians felt toward Westernization of Iran in general. Until the beginning of the 20th century, the adoption of Western manners and objects appears to have gone almost unchallenged by reformist writers. During the late 19th century, the term Farangi Ma'ab was not used to describe a specific male type, but rather people who considered the West superior to Iran. The term was occasionally used in a positive or neutral tone as well in the Iranian press. However, Westernized men drew negative attention from religious and conservative elements of Iranian society, who saw the adoption of Western ways as un-Islamic and damaging the Iranian identity. Aware of this criticism, Western-educated writers attempted to deflect it by dubbing their critics reactionary and enemies of progress. However, as the Iranian nationalist movement strengthened during the constitutional revolution of 1905 to 1911, alongside anti-Western sentiments, then reformist intellectuals themselves began to criticize Westernization, or more precisely, superficial Westernization. The Farangi Ma'ab came to represent blind imitation of the West emanating from Iranian weakness, and was accused of undermining the national project that attempted to generate national pride and a unique Iranian identity. Reformist writers of the early 20th century appropriated the negative use of the term Farangi Ma'ab and injected it with new meanings. They asserted that an empty imitation of the West, adopting only superficial aspects of Western mannerisms and appearance, held Iran back instead of promoting it. This imitation resulted from lack of real knowledge of Western culture. In the new description of the overly Westernized man, disregard for Iranian and Islamic traditions was accompanied by superficial mimicking of Western practices by people who, and I quote here, consider urinating while standing up and eating with knife and fork the highest level of progress. The previous affiliation of Western knowledge and education with practices such as the use of cutlery or the wearing of a suit was disentangled in such texts. Westernized men were now required to prove their possession of Western knowledge and not just Western manners. This might suggest that such practices spread beyond the ranks of the educated elite. Therefore, elite men had to safeguard the privileged status their education granted them by creating clear distinctions between themselves and superficial Westernizers. Since elite men viewed themselves as possessing true understanding and profound appropriation of Western thought and values, they were able to deflect the criticism of superficial mimicry and redirect it toward men who adopted Western style of dress and practices without acquiring such understanding. These mimic figures were dubbed Fokoli, a term derived from the French fokol, or detachable color, that appears in these photos. Fokoli was used only in a negative context and described a distinct type of overly westernized man. The connotations of Fokoli included not only superficial aping of Western style, but also being a fop, a dandy, and a gigolo. With time, Fokoli and Farangi Ma'ab became synonymous, as Farangi Ma'ab lost any positive connotation. In its Western origin, the detachable collar helped in maintaining an appearance of cleanliness, which was associated with the upper classes. As most men did not have indoor plumbing and could not afford the costs of daily laundry, the whiteness of collar suggested cleanliness of underclothes and body attainable only by the wealthy. The detachable collar allowed men of working classes to attain such appearance, as it could be washed separately and was relatively cheap thanks to its mass production. The stiff high collar dictated specific body postures. It reminds me of the agency of objects that we heard about yesterday. As it prevented the free movement of head and neck. All of these elements were exaggerated and ridiculed in the figure of the Fokoli. He was described as obsessed with hygiene and cleanliness, his stiff posture was lampooned, and he was often seen as a pretentious man of non-elite background who imitated the dress and manners of wealthier men. Since any man could wear a collar or use French words in his speech, it became crucial for men of the elite to emphasize what distinguished the Fokoli from the properly westernized man. This is evident in texts from the years preceding the coup d'etat of Reza Khan of 1921. Several newspaper articles from these years minutely describe and categorize the Fokoli, including one article that offered a taxonomy of Fokoli types divided into no less than 14 categories and subcategories. The cultural production surrounding the Fokoli included also the publishing in 1921 and 1922 of two important literary pieces. Jafar Khan has returned from Europe, a vastly popular play by Hassan al-Qadam, and a short story by Sayyid Muhammad Jawanzadeh, Persian's Sugar, that I'm going to refer to shortly. These two pieces emphasized and ridiculed the Fokoli's excessive imitation of Western dress and mannerisms, as well as his Frenchified Persian. And in here, if you can see in this cartoon, it demonstrates the use of French by the Fokoli. The writing beneath is in Persian script, but it's actually all French. It's all French words. In Persian's Sugar, the narrator is an educated Iranian returning to Iran from Europe after 5 years of absence. Due to the corrupt Iranian bureaucracy, he is arrested and thrown into a prison cell, together with 3 other men, a Farangi Ma'ab, a mullah, and a poor Iranian man. The poor man, in his attempts to understand the reason for his arrest, first turns to the mullah, then to the Farangi Ma'ab. And the Farangi Ma'ab's speech is so full of French words that the poor Iranian cannot understand him, while the mullah's speech is similarly replete with Arabic terms. After despairing of his attempts to comprehend the 2 other characters, he addresses the narrator, who earns his gratitude simply by speaking understandable Persian. The corruption of the Persian language by the Farangi Ma'ab and the mullah symbolizes the threat they pose to Iranian identity. The story represents the 3 options open to Iranian society: the road of Islamic tradition, the road of superficial Westernization, and the road of informed Westernization. The narrator of the story symbolizes this kind of informed Westernization and proves that not everyone who appears like a Westerner was necessarily a mimic figure. He is a Western-educated man, but he could not be more different from his cellmate, the Farangi Ma'ab. The narrator's more successful Westernization is first evident in that the poor fellow does not approach him earlier on, since he recognizes him as a Farangi, a European or foreigner. Unlike the Farangi Ma'ab, recognized as an Iranian Westernizer, the narrator carried his Westernization to perfection, assuming a Western and not a Westernized appearance. And this is despite the fact that the narrator's Westernized dress is only described as bowler hat, while the Farangi Ma'ab is described as wearing a high collar, a pocket watch, and sporting a pointy and curled moustache. Despite his perfect Westernization, the narrator is the only character who can speak proper Persian, thus making him the only bearer of proper Persian identity. Since being properly Westernized depended on higher education, which was a privilege of elite men, another aspect of the Fokoli was his social status. A well-known proverb describing the Fokoli was haughty pose and empty pocket, pose ali jibe khali. The poor Fokoli can be seen not as imitating Western models of masculinity, but rather as imitating Iranian elite masculinity, an attempt that made the Fokolis second-hand imitations. Despising the Fokoli allowed elite men to preserve their Westernized ways by differentiating between those who simply looked like Westerners and those who had the financial and cultural capital to support a claim to power. The latter could afford Westernized appearance and practices without becoming Fokolis. During the reign of Reza Shah Pahlavi, the Fokoli lost his prominence in public discourse. One possible explanation relates to the introduction of a new dress law. In late 1927, a new law decreed the Western suit and the Pahlavi hat that you can see in this photo mandatory for all Iranian male citizens, with the exception of clergymen who had received government permission. As the wearing of a European suit was associated with Westernized elite men, the dress law did not create a neutral male appearance. Western-educated men then became the model citizens of Reza Shah's Iran. The nationalization of Western attire, which was named a national or Pahlavi dress, turned its wearer into a symbol of Iran's rejuvenation and modernization, a symbol of power and pride. In this manner, men in Western suits no longer stood to be accused of excessive Westernization, and the need for the mimic figure of the Fokoli lessened. The dress law was advocated on national, scientific, and aesthetic grounds. Traditional clothes and their wearers were associated with ill health and ugliness, whereas the wearers of the national dress were supposedly healthy and conformed to a new standard of male beauty. Among the damages caused by traditional garments, one author lists the wrinkled faces of young men, stooped backs, updrawn shoulders, narrow chests, and nearly dead feet. A letter by a female writer to the newspaper Etelaat describes the dirty undershirts, wrinkled dress, and the black halo of fat and sweat surrounding the hats of traditionally dressed urban aristocrats. The wearers of Western suits and hats were thus imagined as healthy and beautiful, whereas the men wearing traditional attire were described as filthy and sickly. The dress law supported the inculcation of social and political power relations. With Reza Shah's rise to power, many Westernized elite men held positions of power in the government and administration. The dress law brought to the fore their newly achieved political power as well as the cultural power of their model of Westernized masculinity. This did not go unchallenged. The dress law met with opposition from the clergy and tribal chiefs who had wide-scale demonstrations in various cities. Such resistance was but one of several tactics of subversion pursued against the dress law. Different strategies of resistance persisted well into the late 1930s. For example, in Haydar Rajavi's autobiographical story, My Father's Wardrobe, Rajavi's elderly father consents to wear his single Western suit, bought for him as a gift by his son, in cold weather only, and covers it with the qaba, which resembled an old-fashioned Western overcoat and therefore fulfilled the law's demands. Revealingly, the father's behavior was a source of embarrassment for Rajavi and his brothers, and I quote here. "The way he dressed made him look centuries old to me. His traditional garments looked ridiculous, I thought to myself. All my friends' fathers whom I met wore more regular clothes. God, I prayed, why couldn't I have one of those fathers who shaved their beards and wore a suit and tie? It is hard to understand it now, but Agha's appearance must have been an embarrassment to every member of my family who was alive when I was born." Rajavi's short story demonstrates both the failures and the success of the dress form and of the westernized model of Iranian masculinity. On the one hand, young men became so accustomed to Western style that traditional garments seemed to them ridiculous and centuries old, while suits and shaved face looked regular. On the other hand, conservative men found ways to bypass the law, and after Reza Shah's abdication, some of them would return to their traditional garments. The regime's response to the various forms of opposition consolidated new power relations between it and traditional men, and bolstered the hegemony of the new model of masculinity. Policemen would tear turbans off respectable men's heads, trample on them, and send the men on their way bareheaded. Tearing off men's headdresses was an act of emasculation. The inability to respond to this challenge impinged on the masculine identity of men who traditionally held positions of power and honor in society, and simultaneously entrenched the power of government representatives. In addition to the coercive means employed to enforce westernized dress, the dress law facilitated a more subtle assertion of the hegemony of westernized men. The change of dress entailed a change in everyday practices already adopted by these men. The new practices of dress were deemed more suitable to the changing daily lives of Iranians. And again, I quote here from a newspaper article. "For a long period, Iranians used to sit on the floor and eat, or when entering a room out of respect, they would take off their shoes and only then enter the room, or attend meetings and visits wearing tall hats, a shawl, a cloak, and a turban. And now, as a result of becoming familiar and having contact with highly developed nations, have changed this way of living according to the demands of time. It cannot be said that they did not preserve their national traditions. There was a time when an Iranian could wear loose trousers and sit on the floor and eat, but today it would be ridiculous to sit on the floor with ironed base trousers, or remove one's shoes when entering a class, a cinema saloon, a coffee house, or on a visit. Thus, progress, sartorial practices, and modern activities such as cinema going were linked together. To be modern, you had to adopt Western attire, but also Western manners and etiquette. Westernized men's acquaintance with the new practices meant that such men did not have to learn new social norms and were spared the mistakes and embarrassment caused by unfamiliarity with new rules of conduct. They also knew how to wear the new clothes, from ironing the trousers to wearing their hats in the right angle and lifting it in greeting. Unlike them, men used to traditional attire and practices had to adjust to new clothes, which they often found indecorous and even indecent, and also to relearn how to act in public. To this was added the financial burden of purchasing a new wardrobe for men of lower income, and there's even stories about entire villages who had one shared Pahlavi hat who was worn by whoever had to go to town at the time. To conclude, the westernization of male dress in Iran was much more than a change of fashion. It stood at the core of nationalist debates, of social struggles, and of nation and identity building processes. Whether decried as superficial mimics or hailed as the new model of Iranian male citizenship, men in suits and ties became symbols of Iran's grappling with modernity, colonialism, and Western culture. Thank you very much.